Lola Ayanda is a multimedia strategist, author, and reformer. She has spent the last 7 years working with local and international nonprofit organizations, including Mercy Corps and Action Aid, helping them to leverage the power of media and storytelling to amplify their work, to attract more resources, to do more good. Before this, Lola worked in different capacities with radio and television stations. As a Pan-Africanist, Lola uses multimedia to spark debates, lead conversations, and influence action and grassroots development. She currently leads a team of creatives at Insightful Media, a company providing multimedia solutions to development partners to enhance the delivery of projects in Africa. You have the floor now.
Thank you so much, Amulewa, for having me. And thank you, Dapo, for stalking.
I did not talk too much, just a little bit.
Okay, all right then. Yeah, I'm excited to be here to learn and to share with you all. I believe all Black people with roots in Africa share the same struggles and victories. We are one people. To move the continent forward, we need to look beyond our geography, our demarcation. So today's conversation is about stimulating a conversation around shaping African narratives. And my objective is to provoke everyone, every African on this call, to take responsibility for the continent. I have a video to play. I will do that quickly and then come back to the conversation.
Readers will be put off if you don't mention the light in Africa.
Always use the word Africa or darkness.
Treat Africa as if it were one country.
Monkey brain is an African's cuisine. Always use the word Africa or darkness or safari in your title. Subtitles may include the words Zanzibar, Maasai, Zulu, Zambezi, Congo.
Never have a picture of a well-adjusted African on the cover of your book or in it, unless that African has won the Nobel Prize. An AK-47, prominent ribs, naked breasts, use those. If you must include an African, make sure you get one in Maasai or Zulu or Dogon dress.
In your text, treat Africa as if it were one country. It is hot and dusty with rolling grasslands and huge herds of animals and tall, thin people who are starving. Or it is hot and steamy with very short people who eat primates.
Don't get bogged down with precise descriptions. Africa is big. 54 countries, 900 million people who are too busy starving and dying and warring and emigrating to read your book.
The modern African is a fat man who steals and works in the visa office, refusing to give work permits to qualified Westerners who really care about Africa. He's an enemy of development, always using his government job to make it difficult for pragmatic and good-hearted experts to set up NGOs or legal conservation areas.
When your main character is in a desert or a jungle, living with indigenous people, it is okay to mention that Africa has been severely depopulated by AIDS and war.
Always end your book with Nelson Mandela saying something about rainbows or renaissance, because you care.
Or when you watch that video, what came to mind? Anyone?
Okay. I think for me, what came to mind is just the vivid picture of how some Westerners have actually told our stories, basically.
Okay. So, and why do you think that is? Why do you think our story is being told that way?
Okay. I think that's because we don't have any better version of telling our stories. Or we sublet this. We basically sublet telling our stories to those guys, to the whites. Yeah.
Okay. Any other person?
It's to be said by persons who don't know anything about us.
Right. Okay. So why is this happening? There are a lot of reasons. So for us to really tackle the problem, we need to understand why it is happening. I've listed here 5 things. There are a lot of it. Number 1 here, I have Darwinism. Most of us that are science students, I'm sure we remember Charles Darwin and the evolution of men. And we also have colonialism, white self versus black order. We have media influence, we have indigenous migration, and we also have dependence on aid, that's foreign aid. So my first point here is about colonization. How many of us have read the book, The Miseducation of the Negro? If you ask an African youth right now, they have that, I mean, even me inclusive, we have that view of the world that has to do with white versus black, white self versus black order. In other words, the white people are the civilized people. They are the ones that have defined and shaped our view of the world. The black is inferior to white. And that is not our fault. Our school books from social studies in secondary school, everything we've been taught, our curriculums were shaped by white people. All of those things we learned have kind of impacted our view of our world and ourselves. If your view of the world and yourself is already telling you that you're inferior, our actions over the years continue to reinforce this. I grew up in Lagos Island, and the way they magnify white people, even when I saw an Indian man, I thought an Indian man was Oyibo. In that sense of, I classified Indians with Europeans. So I accorded that, that prestige they taught you. The white man is the most brilliant, is the most fascinating being. In fact, is a god. But then it took re-educating myself, and I'll come to that point later, to understanding that we are just peoples, right? So all of this will make sense in the long run. So let me ask you a question. Dapo, your video is on, so I'll ask you this question. Describe your ideal woman.
Okay, can everyone hear me? This question.
Yes,
all
we
right,
can.
So, when you say ideal, I think I like a size 8. If you guys know what a size 8 is, I think I'm attracted to a size 8, something of that sort. Something I can handle.
In terms of skin color, what do you like?
I like dark people. I love dark people, like very dark.
Okay.
The darker, the better.
So why do you like size 8?
I just think size 8 is pretty handy for my, I like.
Could that be, okay, let me not put you on the spot. Could that?
No, that's fine.
Could that your desire, could it have been reinforced by what you have seen over the years? And how the Western world has shaped your view of beauty, the African woman. The fatter she is, the more beautiful she is for African men. What I understand from the men then, that they like flesh on the bones of an African woman. That's a pretty woman. So do you think any of these views, your personal views, even about how you view yourself, or even how you view the woman you want to marry, is being shaped through the colonial lens?
I'm not really giving it much thought. So I mean, my mom has flesh to an extent, so I love my mom.
Okay.
Yeah, so, I've just always been drawn to people without so much flesh.
For instance, like I was asking Dapo, who defined beauty for you? What does it even mean to be civilized? Let's go there for a bit. What does it mean to be civilized?
It's me, Toby. Can I say something?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I think for civilization, I'm a lover of movies. Okay. Yes, I love movies, and of course, you flock around. I think television, the media, basically television, magazines growing up, foreign magazines. At some point, I got to know that you are civilized when you can speak good English. Yes, when you can speak well, and you can speak like the Englishman, or you get so that's in quotes, even if you don't know what you are seeing, but as far as you can speak good English, it's an indicator or an indication of being civilized, basically.
The typical lecturer in the university in Nigeria is proud to be quoting Aristotle and to be quoting all those white old men that have passed. And that is why I like Asians, Chinese people. You know how they pay so much attention to their language. They teach in their language. As a matter of fact, for children to really understand their place in society, for them to really, really be productive citizens, they should be able to read and write in their local language. When we see a white person, how do we act? You compose yourself quickly. There's something about us, don't you think? When you just say white person, you just change how you walk, or how you're smiling, or how you're standing.
That's true.
Okay. If you have white friends, like I do you treat them separately than how you treat your fellow Black men who are your friends? Be sincere to yourself. All these things are questions we're asking ourselves, right? So for us as Africans, we need to interrogate our ideologies and social behavior. And when we talk about illiteracy, when I say Malam on the street that is speaking Hausa to me, subconsciously I tag him as illiterate. But that guy might be able to speak Hausa, read Hausa, and write in Hausa. As far as he can speak and write and read in his local language, he is not an illiterate. For me, the first thing I want us to understand here today is we need to start interrogating our ideologies. Why do I behave the way I am? Why do I see people the way I see them? Who defined my view of the world? Who told me that I need to bleach my skin to be white? Who told me that white is beautiful? There's a way that men, African men, also reinforces these stereotypes that makes the African women feel pressurized to bleach their skin. So the change we're talking about starts with all of us here. I'll move on to the next thing here. Okay, this quote talked about, it's from the book I mentioned earlier, The Miseducation of the Negro. When you control a man's thinking, you do not have to worry about his actions. You do not have to tell him to stand here or go yonder. He will find his proper place and stay in it. You do not need to send him to the back door. He will go without being told. In fact, if there is no back door, he will cut one for his special benefits. His education makes it necessary. So talking about Darwinism. Darwinism is essentially about racism backed by science, right? So imagine science telling you that white is superior, Blacks are monkeys. I won't dwell on too much on this one because I've kind of touched on it in the previous one, explanation I gave on colonialism. Here is one person from 1982. It is impossible for us to suppose that these beings, by beings, it's talking about Black people, should be men. Because if we suppose them to be men, one would begin to believe we ourselves are not Christians, right? So all of this cumulates to how and the lens through which we are viewed. And there are things that we do that continues to make this a dominant narrative today. Media influence. Chimamanda Adichie, she was giving a TED talk sometimes back. She said, show a people as one thing only, over and over again, and that is what they become. During the COVID-19 pandemic, in the early days, the media reported number of deaths in Europe. I'm sure most of us are familiar with that. What we were seeing on television was infographics, right? We never saw dead bodies. However, imagine that happened in Africa. That it was Africa that was reporting that high number of deaths. The question is, why do storytellers, the media, why do they put respect and dignity to Western stories when they're telling them, but always find a way to dehumanize African stories? And until we deconstruct that notion and that action and start to take leadership through our own actions in Africa, our stories will continue to be told that way. So this other person here, this is just 2007. So this is not so far away. This is just 2007 here. Africans are less intelligent than Westerners, says DNA practitioner. A typical African child will relate to riddles and jokes, we relate to folklores. There are ways that we were sharing indigenous knowledge way back when that are inbuilt as an African person, that you would easily understand a human angle aspect or perspective than something that is too scientific. Can Africa start to initiate theories that speaks to Africa's issues and start to use that in the academic space? The way we can't wait, a typical Nigerian person, African, wants to jackpot from the continent. You can only jackpot when you believe that you're coming from a hell hole. We want to just run away. All of that is showing that, we don't want to, we don't really want to reflect on our own issues and solve them. We want to depend on them. And they are offering us the better life or the best life we can ever have. Yeah, so why not? I'll talk about dependence on foreign aid. And for me, this one hits home. For some reason, African leaders are convinced that the continent cannot survive without foreign aid and investment. I have a video on my Instagram page that talked about the race for Africa and the long-term effects. But back to the topic for today, let me just talk about the fact that there's nowhere you've seen a beggar treated with dignity. Whenever I see October 1st happen and there's a public holiday and there's dancing and celebration, for me, it's a reflection moment. It's not a joyous thing. Have you ever seen, the question I have here is, have you ever seen where billions are given without expectations? The more we depend on the Western world, the more we give them the power to influence and shape our story. Sometimes NGOs, especially international NGOs, they send a foreigner to Africa to tell African story. How can you commission a Westerner to tell a story of a people when the person does not even understand the context? So imagine now, let me give you an example. In northern Nigeria, if you see a child walking barefooted on the streets, holding plates, that does not mean the child is a beggar. It's not in all cases that the child is a beggar. A child from a wealthy home can decide to buy food, sit down on the floor, barefooted and eat. Culturally, a typical Hausa person likes community. So typically, even when you go to their house, a wealthy family, they could sit down in circles, put food in a big bowl and eat together. But if a white person is coming to cover that kind of story, people sitting on the floor, eating with their hands, barefooted, they can think that they are not civilized, and that can influence the angle to which they tell that story. So, but if an African is telling an African person's story, you're already used to the culture and tradition of your people. So you will know what and how to tell the story in a way that is very empowering. So another campaign we are talking about, we are leading right now, is ensuring that most INGOs stop to send foreigners to Africa to tell stories of Africa. We want Africans to tell African stories. We want women to tell women's stories. Today, solution starts with you. And the first thing first is that you cannot tell a story that you do not know. So as Africans, we need to learn about our history through the lens of the fathers of Pan-Africanism. How many of us know, have ever read about Pan-Africanism and the struggles of the early days of people like Marcus Garvey, or people like W.E.B. and Du Bois? How many of us have read that story or tried to understand the context? Number two, decolonize your mind. I'm pretty much trying to move faster now. Decolonize your mind. That belief, that thing that just makes you reset when you see white people, and then when you see Black people use business as usual, that needs to stop, right? And then when you are in Nigeria, you can jump the queue. But when you go to England, you compose yourself. All of those little foxes, those little actions are what people see that makes them continue to stereotype us, no matter how good, excellent we are. For those of us that are influencers, those of us that have social media pages that are actually focused on all of this, those of us that are media practitioners, we need to start telling African stories. Instead of us showing picture and doing Instagram reel that show us going on vacation in England, in America, can we start using social media? Okay, you need to educate others in your circle of influence. You need to find ways to contribute to Pan-African conversations. How many of us here really believe in the Black Lives Matter movement? I recall watching a video of Malcolm X talking about Black consciousness, until every African, every Black man, wherever you are on the continent, comes together to understand that we share the same struggle, to understand that we have a common goal, and stop to look at ourselves as enemies of each other, and really understand who the enemy is, until we come together to mobilize for change. I'm sorry. So for me, I don't put myself in this small box of Nigerian or small box of ethnicity or small tribe of Yoruba people. For me, Yoruba is a nation. Question everything. As a young African person, develop a philosophical mind. What does knowledge even mean to me? What is knowledge? Who taught me what I know today? Could what they taught me could they have been faulty? I have this philosophical mind that gingers you to research everything. Don't just take people's words, hook, line, and sinker, and just start to repost, retweet. Go back down in history. Learn about Ethiopianism. learn about Pan-Africanism, learn about the struggle, understand where you sit in that space and the opportunities you have now. Dr. Joy Degore talked about post-traumatic slave syndrome, a condition that exists where a population has experienced multi-generational trauma resulting from centuries of slavery and continues to experience oppression and institutionalized racism. How many of us have read the story of Rhodes Must Fall in South Africa? The statue of a colonial master was on a campus, and then the students decided to call for it to be taken down. All of those things are significant in our history. It also shows that Africa can change, Africa can develop. Let's not lose hope that it cannot change. But it takes unity, consistency, and being positively radical. Positively radical doesn't mean you'll be violent. It means that you would be confident, you'll be knowledgeable, and you speak up when you're being oppressed. You will be excellent in everything that you do. Whenever you have a space as an African, you show forth the excellence of the continent. And I hope that this conference kind of gingered all of us to start to reject certain things. Stephen Biko says, once the oppressed has been so effectively manipulated and controlled by the oppressor as to make the oppressed believe that he is a liability to the white man, then there will be nothing the oppressed can do that will really scare the powerful masters. I'll just let you all reflect on these words. The other one here is by Franz Fanon. He talked about each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it or betray it in relative opacity. In other words, our forefathers have been on this struggle for years. A typical or an average young person in Africa may say, after all, they've been talking about this Pan-African thing for years and they've not really done anything much. So why should I bother myself about it? The truth is that each generation needs to shift something in this conversation. So the generation before us have passed the baton to us. What are we doing with it? The baton? Are we just twerking on social media, buying Peruvian hair, which is also westernized? For me, is decolonizing your mind, knowing that you have a role to play in all this conversation that we're having, that you can no longer sit on the sidelines of history, that every day you wake up as an African young person, you have a role to play. Everything you do, how you speak, how you talk, how you think about yourself, what you say, what you read, all of those contributes to telling our stories. Marimba Annie, she said, Europeans only have power over us because we continue to give it to them. Just reflect on all of those. So I think at this point, I'll stop. And for me, any opportunity I get to really set the record straight, to encourage fellow Africans to take their place on the continent and take responsibility for the African narrative, I take it really seriously. Thank you so much, everyone.
All right, thank you so much, Lola. I mean, it's what a way to actually, end the conference. I just have to say, I don't know. Please, you guys just appreciate Lola in the chat box. Send thank you, say thank you to Lola in the chat box. I could hear like the passion she speaks with. I could feel the passion she speaks with, and it's just important that we. I hope as much as that, as much of those passion or of that passion has been, transferred to us. If we have questions, we are going to be taking that in a minute. But many things actually stood out for me as well. While she was saying most of what she was saying. So personally in the university, for instance, I studied sociology, and I could remember Lola was just like saying something that had been in my head for like 2 years or like for a couple of years. In the university, we studied sociology. Sociology studies human beings in their societies. But I could remember my lecturers always quoting Aristotle, always quoting certain Emily Durkheim, Talcott Parsons. In fact, the Montesquieu that Lola also mentioned, Baron de Montesquieu, those were the people like my lecturers were always quoting. I'm like, I know that we have Nigerian sociologists. I know we have sociologists somewhere in Ife that they actually write books, they actually have theories, but we are not really, doing or being taught as regards what these people have propounded. And I know for a fact that affected us up until the very, very point that we find ourselves. But I think it's just important that we take note of everything Lola has said so far. Some of us, we know these things, but we are just always like, oh, you know what? Maybe at some point I would start working on them. It is important we start working on them now. We need to, like Lola said once again, decolonize our mind. It is very, very important. If you look at the most developed countries of the world, these are countries that let's talk about language. They speak their own languages. Over the past 2-3 decades, we've seen how China has like risen to become one of the world power now. Like you cannot just, when you're talking about development or growth or world powers, you cannot just say China should go and sit down somewhere. They speak their own language. You look at Japan, you look at all these countries. These countries, they have one thing. They have, they are rooted in their identities. They are rooted in, and your language is actually part of your identity.
Mine would actually be more of a question and also an addition, because when Lola was speaking about indigenous knowledge, it stood out for me because I worked on indigenous knowledge as my final project in school, and I got to realize that now there are so many indigenous knowledge that had actually gone. You can't even account for it again because it's not being passed. So difficult to see a Nigerian or an African passionate about continuing in line this indigenous knowledge, a way to paint a very good picture of us. It's quite, how do we get back, or I don't know if it's a question or it's just me thinking aloud, how do we go back to that point where I think we missed it?
Right. Thank you so much. Change starts in a day. I'm seeing a couple of young people now coming up and doing great stuff. I'm seeing some academics doing great stuff around African knowledge, but as individuals, any space we have to tell genuine African stories, we take it. As media people, in your shows, when you're doing radio programs, you have an opportunity to speak in a gathering when you have government officials, you are influencers, use that influence to call for change, give them examples of the impact. Bring, for instance, you work on radio, bring someone from the Ministry of Education, bring a child, ask that child what they would have preferred to learn in school, for instance. Let the education system, the government, start to see why they need to go back home to do their homework. That in as maths can be taught in Yoruba, can be taught in Hausa, can be taught in Igbo. Textbooks can be written in those languages and other languages in the country, depending on what we agree as a nation. But we can no longer say that for us to be classified as civilized, as a human being, and accorded that respect as a learned person, it has to be English or French, like other Francophone countries in Africa. So for me, I think it starts with all of us within our space and our platforms. You can even start a conversation on Twitter. You can do anything with your space. You have a voice, use it. And it starts from there as a place of influence. For me, that would be what I would say on that. Thank you.
Adanchin Makandik Elijah, you have a question? Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much for this time. A lot of thoughts running in my mind. And I wanted to observe a number of things like the issue of preference or attraction. I, for one, I like a white lady. And when we look at the way our nations are, we have been independent, a case study of Nigeria, for example, 62 years ago. But up to today, if you look at our streets, we see poverty. We remain backward. Now, for us to be able to say we are not different from the white, are we being honest to ourselves? Is it true? If you bring Europeans to Africa and hand over the country, look at what they are doing in South Africa. South Africa is what it is today because of the presence of the whites. So I am of the view, my own philosophy, if I'm going to project a philosophy, it will be one of collaboration. We do not have it all. When you take a black man to US, in that US environment, they do great things. So it's not about individual incapacity, but national incapacity. That is the problem. Best doctors are blacks. Economics, look at what Okonjo-Iweala is doing. She is heading the World Trade Organization. Black people are good, but when we are in a group, we fail to create systems that work. We have failed ourselves. We need more of collaboration. What do the whites have that we don't have? We need to get them. instead of hating on them or castigating, I think we should rather be more open as to how do we imbibe and how do we embrace what they have that we don't have.
Okay.
And then replicate on our own. And then also talking about Pan-African activism, we need to also put it on ourselves. I feel somehow when I see our ladies, like the speaker was saying, buying wig. It really irritates me. What are we saying to nature? What are we saying to the whites? We try to copy them. Why? Can't you look yourself? So if we are going to do that advocacy, it really needs to be done. First of all, I have to start with myself. Then, of course, we on this platform, it will not be enough for us to have this a forum, and then tomorrow you go by, you are buying wig. Are we creating a culture that is truly African? Are we making a decision that, okay, yes, 17 of us on this platform from today, we are going to start living the African life, promoting the African identity and the African culture? Unless we live here with such resolutions, then our discussion is aimless. Because if we just still go back to the same culture, then what have we achieved? So this is the challenge I want to throw to the house. Thank you so
Mr.
much.
Adanche, thank you so much. Just before I take Lola's reaction to that, let me just mention that the idea about the conversation we've had this afternoon is not to hate, is not to incite us against any race or any color, but is to awaken and to remind us of our own reality and of our own identity as Africans. Now, certain things have obviously blocked the understanding of our identity as Africans, and that, I believe, was and is the agenda or the assignment that Lola has come to do this afternoon. But Lola, please, I'll allow you to react to that as well.
You've said it all, Dakpo, and I mean, Adachin also has his own points. But my question is, we keep talking about Africa is backwards, Africa is poor. Please, what is the definition of poverty? Who taught us that definition of poverty? Do we know that in America, in the UK, every country, they have poverty? It's not about hating. It's about awakening that consciousness. It's about understanding the history, appreciating who we are, and then maximizing that to change our own narrative. And then you talked about replicating. For me, the conversation here today is not about replicating what is done in Europe, in Africa. Yes, I agree with collaboration, but collaboration on our own terms, not we being dependent on them. That's my submission. Omalawa, I see you have a question or a contribution.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you so much, Lola. It's been a very insightful session. Thank you so much. And I wanted to add to what you said and also react to what Adan, if I get that name correctly, said. Lola, you said something about poverty, that who defines poverty, and I think that is very true. When most of these international maybe newspapers or media, when they want to talk about poverty, they tell you, okay, a particular percentage of Africans live below maybe $1 a day, and you wonder, is our currency even in dollar, right? And number two, if you think about it, people that are in the farms, some of them live, they have a subsistence culture. They plant and they harvest and they eat, so, and they eat well, funny enough, they eat very well. But you coming from somewhere just because they are not spending some dollar on Starbucks or, buying burger or, eating expensive food, you're saying, oh, these people are poor. So that's, we can't measure poverty by other people's standards. I think that's just like the sum of what Lola has been saying. Let's not measure what we're doing by other people's standards. And there was a time
I even was raising a conversation on Twitter. I'm not very, very active on Twitter, but occasionally I just drop things there. And I was asking, who even says, for instance, that democracy is the best form of government anywhere? I mean, this is Africa. We did not practice democracy traditionally. I mean, before the advent of that, even if we practiced it, it wasn't totally democracy. I mean, we had a system of government. So I'm not saying we should discard democracy totally, but I'm saying, what if there was another means? What if there was a more appropriate, form of government that is peculiar to Africa and African stability, right? And another thing, you mentioned something about South Africa. What really is there about South Africa? I mean, is it the good roads? Is it the big industries? Because if that's it, then maybe yes. But if I hope you're not seeing it that South Africa is developed, because I believe that development is not about good roads. Development is not just about good roads. It's not just about it's not just about high-rise buildings or companies, right? Development starts more from human development, right? And that's where we should be going. So what is South Africa? Is South Africa really investing in human development? If they were, then, if the whites that came to South Africa, if they were investing in human development, then the blacks that were seen as who has not been contributing anything, then they should have been better off, right? Because I feel like you're coming from an aspect of, maybe we don't have a culture that as blacks, maybe we don't have a culture that develops, but that's totally not true. So that's my submission. Thank you so much once again, Lola. Thank you so much. You really, you really did justice. I'm so happy. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
All right, thank you so much, Lewa. Lola, you wanted to say something?
No, I was just going to say that, of course, the major challenge on the continent is the corruption. And the corruption is also linked back to the colonization, if you look at the history and the stories. So all of that is interlinked. Until we go back to the beginning and understand all of those things, then we would know how to channel our energy as young people, how to mobilize for the change we want to see on our continent. We cannot tell a story that we do not understand. Thank you.
I would just like to leave us with one thing, and that's the part where Lola said we should interrogate our ideologies. We should interrogate our ideologies, because one of the quotes that was shown, which I've actually heard before, from Chimamanda, is when you show someone a thing over and over again, that is what the person actually conforms to, and that is what you tend to believe. That's the sort of life you tend to keep living. So we've been conditioned to certain things that we've been seeing over and over again, and we need to now start interrogating that ideology, because it was off the ideologies, or off those ideologies, that we have most of the beliefs that we have. And it will be very, very difficult to change. Just to mention, it will be really, really difficult for us to change those ideologies. But then it is important, if we really want to experience growth and development, that we interrogate those ideologies. I am very, very happy that we had this session as the last session, because if we speak about transformational leadership, we speak about entrepreneurship and driving resilience without actually understanding who we are as Africans, without actually being able to tell our story as an African. I'll come out and call myself a leader somewhere. I'll say I'm an entrepreneur, but I'm an African first before I'm an entrepreneur. And who are you, or who am I as an African? If we do not understand that, then we still have a problem. The developed countries of the world, they know who they are. They properly understand what they are rooted in. We've been sold different things. Some of us probably understand who we are as Africans more than each other, but it is important at this stage, after this conference, that we are able to interrogate the ideologies that we are used to, and then we move forward from there. So thank you so much for being a part of LEADAC 2022.